So what you have then is cell membranes with a lot of arachidonic acid and with low amounts of EPA and DHA. And that seems to be an unhealthy state. That's a state that promotes inflammation, promotes blood clotting, maybe promotes some other things. And what we know is if people increase their intake of EPA and DHA, even by eating more fish or by taking omega 3 supplements, they end up with more EPA and DHA in the cell membranes because those fatty acids get into cell membranes very easily. And one of the things they do is they act against arachidonic acid. So you get a decrease in these prostaglandins and leukotrienes that I talked about before that do things like cause headaches, cause pain, cause fever, and so on. Now, omega 3s are not fast acting like aspirin will be. So you can't take omega 3s to get a headache to disappear in 5 to 10 minutes, although aspirin can do that. They're long, they're slow acting, but long lasting. So you need to be taking omega 3s or consuming omega 3s, preferably from the diet, um, for a period of weeks to months to get enough in your cell membranes. But then you start getting the biological impact of this sort of mitigation of too much omega 6 arachidonic acid. So these fatty acids are working at the membrane level to sort of stop the harm of too much omega 6s in the location. They also have their own actions in the membrane to help control inflammation, amongst other things. They're very important in the eye and the brain, particularly DHA. This promotes good visual function in babies, promotes good brain function in babies. That's really very clear. And for this reason, uh, you know, pregnant women, women who are breastfeeding, need to make sure they're getting enough omega 3s, particularly DHA in the diet for the newborn infant. So, so what I'm presenting to you now is we've got these cell membranes that are controlling sort of cellular function, and the exact nature of what the membrane is doing is modified or is changed according to the relative amounts of omega 6 arachidonic acid in particular and the omega 3s, EPA and DHA. So we've sort of got to balance that up to get our cells working optimally. I think that's a good way to think of it.
Yeah, I remember when I was kind of looking into some topics a while back, they would talk about kind of like ratios of omega 6 to omega 3 fatty acids. And it seemed like the argument there was that historically we had closer to like maybe a 1 to 1 ratio. And nowadays, with our modern food environment, we're like way off to maybe 20 to 1,
Yeah.
where these omega 6s are making up just such a bolus of that ratio that we're starting to potentially see problematic things like of what you described there. Is there am I right about that, first of all? Is that something we should be
Yeah.
considering, or has that
Yeah.
been kind of teased out of the
Yeah,
research?
I mean, I think what you're saying, Zach, is right at a particular level, but already I think we're getting the idea that fatty acids are pretty complicated, and
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
we have multiple members of the different families. So I've talked about linoleic acid and arachidonic acid from the omega 6 family, and I've talked about alpha linolenic acid, EPA, and DHA from the omega 3 family. So the first thing that's clear is you've got multiple members in the family and they don't all behave the same way. Okay. So this is just like a human family, right? So not all members in the family are behaving the same way. So we have to be just careful that we're thinking about, which omega 6 are we talking about? Which omega 3 are we talking about? What sort of cellular behavior are we talking about? But so I think, it is complicated. But if we step back, generally speaking, linoleic acid is easily the most common omega 6 fatty acid in the diet. And linoleic acid intake in humans has gone up dramatically over the course of particularly the second half of the 20th century. And that is because, and this is particularly true in North America. So, North America is ahead of the rest of the world with the increase in linoleic acid intake. And one of the reasons is in North America, the seed oils the margarines were embraced earlier than in the rest of the world. So in the US particularly, but also in Canada, you had a dietary change probably 10 to 20 years ahead of Europe towards more linoleic acid. So some of it is through human consumption, through so you have readily available seed oils. They're cheap, they're plentiful. They were encouraged because of the cholesterol lowering property of linoleic acid, actually. They were used to make margarines, but also those seeds are used, or seeds and oils are used, um, for example, in farming, farm animal feeding. So they've got into the farm animal food chain where they weren't really present before. Um, so actually, animal foods contain more linoleic acid than they used to because of the changes in animal feeding. So one thing that has been very well documented is that Western populations, but ultimately, of course, everyone follows what the West is doing. So this is happening elsewhere as well. Have moved to much higher intake of linoleic acid. So of omega 6s, but particularly linoleic acid. So that's gone up a lot in the course of the 20th century. And at the same time, omega 3 fatty acid intake, if anything, has gone down. Okay. So we've had this shift away from omega 3s towards omega 6s. And if you think about fish consumption, I mentioned fish as an important source of EPA and DHA, which are the really important omega 3s. Not that alpha linolenic acid is unimportant, but EPA and DHA are super important. Um, what's interesting is actually fewer people eat fish now than in the past. So fish was a much more common food going back, 100 years or more. Um, so we've moved away from eating fish. Of course, some people like fish, but a lot of people don't. So we've moved away from eating fish, and at the same time, we've moved towards bigger use of seed oils, bigger use of margarines, feeding seeds and seed oils to cattle and stuff like that. So you're bang on. You're dead right.